You know, when we think about finding a treatment for ALS, we often picture that one eureka moment in a lab. But that's just the start. The real journey is building a bridge from that idea to actual patients. And that bridge is built with clinical trials. And let me tell you, for a disease as tricky as ALS, building that bridge, well, it's one of the biggest challenges in medicine today.
So it all comes down to this one simple question, right? How do we actually know if a new drug for ALS is working? It sounds easy enough, but figuring out if a change is because of the drug or just random chance, that's where things get really complicated.
Yeah, see, with some diseases you have these clear signs, right? A simple test tells you what's going on. But ALS, it's more like a puzzle, where the pieces are always moving. And if you're a patient or a family member seeing all these headlines about potential breakthroughs, understanding why this puzzle is so tough is honestly the first step to understanding what it's going to take to find a real cure.
All right, so let's dive into this puzzle. What makes it so different? We're going to break it all down. We'll look at the unpredictable nature of ALS itself, the huge challenge of just trying to measure it, and then some of the really smart ways scientists are designing trials to finally see the whole picture.
I mean, we have a gold standard for how to run a clinical trial, a playbook that works for a lot of conditions. But ALS, it just doesn't play by the rules. There are so many unique things about this disease that can completely mask whether a drug is working or not. So researchers have to solve for those problems first before they can even hope to see a drug's true effect.
So the first big piece of this puzzle, and you could argue it's the biggest one, it isn't even about the drug. It's about the disease itself. ALS is just incredibly unpredictable from person to person. And that huge variability is the very first wall every single clinical trial runs into.
And this right here really gets to the heart of the problem. You can have two people, both diagnosed with ALS, but their journeys can look completely different. One person might see slow changes over years, while another experiences things much more rapidly. So imagine this. If the person with the naturally slower progression happens to be in the group getting the new drug, how do you know if it's the drug working or if that's just how their disease was going to unfold anyway? That's the noise researchers are trying to cut through.
So to deal with all that variability, researchers have to become expert matchmakers. They spend a ton of time trying to create two groups, the one getting the drug and the one getting the placebo, that are as similar as humanly possible. They're looking at age, where symptoms started, how fast things were progressing before the trial, even genetic factors. It's only when those groups are perfectly balanced that you can really be sure that any difference you see is because of the drug.
But, and this is a big but, this whole idea of creating perfectly balanced groups bumps up against the tough reality. ALS is a rare disease. There just aren't that many people living with it, which makes finding enough participants for a trial a whole other challenge.
Just to put it in perspective, we're talking about maybe 30,000 people in the entire US living with ALS at any one time. Now, compare that to millions of people with, say, heart disease. You can see how finding enough people who meet the trial criteria gets really hard. And when you have smaller trials, every single person's data is that much more important. It makes the whole statistical side of things feel like a real high-wire act.
Okay, so we've got an unpredictable disease and a small number of patients. The next puzzle piece is maybe the trickiest. How do you even measure this thing? You can't just take someone's blood pressure or measure a tumor. There's no simple, objective signal for ALS. So how in the world do you measure a moving target like this?
Well, for years now, the main tool has been something called the ALS Functional Rating Scale Revised, or ALSFRS for short. Now, this isn't some fancy blood test or brain scan. It's basically a very detailed questionnaire, and it's become the gold standard for tracking how ALS affects a person's everyday life. And we're not talking about abstract numbers here. This scale makes it real. It tracks 12 core activities, things like speaking, swallowing, walking, even handwriting and breathing. It's a way to put a number on what someone can and can't do, which is incredibly important. So here's the deal with the score. Each of those 12 activities gets a score from 4 down to 0, for a total possible score of 48. But here's the key. The real magic isn't the number itself. It's tracking the rate of change over time. A drug doesn't have to be a miracle cure that stops the disease cold. If it can just slow down that rate of decline, even a little bit, that is a massive win.
But you know, a scale like this, which relies on what a patient reports or what a doctor observes, it has its limits. The Holy Grail, what everyone is searching for, is a true biomarker. Think of it like a cholesterol test for heart disease, a simple, objective signal, maybe in the blood, that gives you a direct, unbiased snapshot of what the disease is doing.
And the hunt for that biomarker is on, for sure. There are a few promising candidates, but one of the front runners is called neurofilament light chain, or NFL. The easiest way to think about it is like this. When a nerve cell gets damaged, it sheds this protein. So if you see higher levels of NFL in the blood, it could be a direct sign that the disease is active. That would give researchers a much faster, more precise way to see if a drug is actually working to protect those neurons.
So let's recap. You've got this super variable disease, a small group of patients to work with, and no perfect way to measure what's happening. Faced with all that, how do you get a clear answer? Well, you get smarter. Researchers have started to completely rethink how they design trials, creating innovative models to get around these exact problems. Now, before we get into the new designs, we have to talk about the placebo. Look, I know it's a tough concept, especially in a disease like this, but it is the absolute foundation of good science. The only way to know for sure if a drug is working is to compare it to a placebo, something that looks identical but does nothing. It's how you filter out all that noise we talked about, and it's truly the only way to prove a treatment actually works.
The big problem, though, is that the old way of doing things, one trial for one drug, it's painfully slow. When you're dealing with a disease that moves as fast as ALS can, testing things one at a time, taking years for each one, it's just not good enough. Something had to change.
And that's where something called a platform trial comes in. And honestly, it's a game changer. The idea is brilliant. Instead of starting from zero for every single new drug, you build one big, permanent trial structure, a platform. Then you can test multiple drugs all at the same time, using just one shared placebo group for comparison.
The difference this makes is just huge. It's way more efficient, right? Because fewer people need to be in the placebo group overall. It's also super flexible. A new drug candidate comes along, you can just add it into the platform. But the most important thing, it just speeds everything up dramatically. We get answers, yes or no, so much faster.
So when you put all this together, a better handle on the disease's variability, better tools to measure it, and these smarter trial designs, suddenly the path forward starts to look a lot clearer. It's still going to be tough, no doubt about it, but the roadmap is there.
And this brings us to a really important point, a real shift in how we think about this. When a trial shows that a drug doesn't work, that is not a failure. Not at all. In science, finding out what doesn't work is just as valuable as finding out what does. It gives researchers critical information and stops them from wasting time and resources heading down a dead end.
You know, progress in science is almost never about one giant leap. It's about taking one small, determined step after another. Every single trial, whether it succeeds or fails, adds another crucial piece to that puzzle we talked about. It helps us build a clearer and clearer picture of ALS and how we can finally beat it.
So where does that leave us? Well, the point of understanding all these challenges isn't to get discouraged. It's the opposite. It's about truly appreciating the incredible, monumental effort that goes into this work. Building that bridge from a cool idea in a lab to a treatment that changes lives, well, that takes everyone. It takes the brilliant scientists, the dedicated doctors, and the absolute courage of patients and their families all pulling in the same direction.